to Purim. First of all, let's just start with a question. What makes Purim is unique amongst all of the holidays in the Jewish calendar? Actually, several unique things. Let's see if I can count at least three that are entirely unique. See if anybody can come up with some aspects of Purim that are totally unique to Purim and are not true about any other holiday. Okay, don't all shout at once.
Masquerade.
What's that?
Masquerade. You're in a costume. You're not.
That's a custom.
Yourself.
That's a custom. It's custom. But the other things I'm going to say are fundamental. Like if you didn't wear a costume on Purim, have you fulfilled Purim, Dina?
Yeah, if you do reading the Megillah twice.
Right. So I don't want to disparage. My wife thinks that if I don't wear a costume on Purim, that I'm being a bad rabbi, for sure. But
she's right.
Okay. I never suggested she wasn't right, but my wife would also agree that some random person who comes in without wearing a costume has fulfilled the obligations of Purim. Right?
Well, not exactly.
Wow,
God didn't save us.
God didn't save us. Does that mean we don't get to eat, Aaron?
What?
Well, the two do not correspond. You can eat without God saving us, or you cannot eat because God saved us, whatever you want.
Well, why do you really think that's we celebrate God didn't save us?
I didn't say we celebrate it. You asked what the differences are.
You said God didn't save us, but that would imply
God didn't save us.
God didn't save us.
Because
is that what we believe, Aaron?
No, it was a human-generated situation that we were able to work our way out of just because of our own perseverance and our own good deeds. But it had nothing to do with...
Far be it from me to disagree with you, Aaron, but I'm going to disagree with you. If I may. Okay? And here...
Could it be that...
hold on, if I may,
sorry.
for just a moment.
Sorry.
I'm not going to go out on a limb here. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Here we go. You're seeing right now the Al Hanisim for Purim. Okay? And these words, Ve'ata berachamecha harabim, you, in your great mercy. Who is the you in that sentence?
Well, Hashem.
Right. So right, Hafartat atatov kyokat machshavato. Veheshiv lo gmulo b'rasho. You, God, you gave him his just desserts. V'talu et otov et banav al eitz, and you put him and his children on the gallows. Right? V'asita imahim, and you, God, did nisim v'niflov nodeh l'shem chagadol, and we give thanks to your great name. So I would say, at least as far as the Siddur is concerned, we do believe God saved us, so we can eat. So I'm, with due respect, Aaron, I think.
No, you ascribed everything. You listen.
I didn't ascribe anything. I read the Al Hanisim. I read the Al Hanisim.
Never mind Al Hanisim.
Well, how can I never mind Al Hanisim? It's part of our tradition.
You can have all the traditions you want, Rabbi.
It's part of the Siddur.
I know.
Okay,
I hear what you're saying.
Look, if you want to throw out the Siddur, there's nothing I can do to.
The miracle of the Red Sea, I understand. Getting water out of rocks, I can get. Apportioning the land of Israel, I understand.
So you'll have to stay tuned for the next class. The next class will peel back that layer a little bit. We'll get there.
Not a problem.
But okay, Annie, what's unique about Purim?
What I wanted to say is that the Megillat Esther is using people to execute God's plan. God has always used people. He used Dvorah Neviah, and used Barak, and used Yael.
Let's talk about practice.
It's indirect influence.
Okay, let's talk about practice. I'm talking about unique practices that have to do with Purim.
You mean to fulfill the obligation of Purim?
Yeah, it could be such a thing.
Oh, well, according to the rabbis, eventually after their saving and the miracles, they said, so that Purim, listen to the Megillah, Matanot Levyonim, and what else? Limchot et Zecher Amalek No, we don't do with Amalek. Even though Haman is Amalek, those are the things.
Gifts to the poor.
Okay.
So
So
Make yourself
okay, all
not
right. So
able
Annie,
to
you're giving
discern
okay.
between-
You're rushing us. Okay. Yes.
What about not being able to discern between something
Okay.
nice
So
and
yes,
something
I would
not
say
so nice?
that if we believe that there's a mitzvah to get inebriated, which I don't believe there is,
I'm not inebriated,
that would
but
be a unique feature of Purim. Okay, so here's some of the. Let's start with one unique feature of Purim. One unique feature of Purim is that Purim is the only holiday that has two different dates that are assigned to it that are dependent on where do you live.
Yes. If there is a wall around the city or no wall around the city, yeah.
And there are even other dates that the first Mishnah in Megillah tells us there are all sorts of different dates. So Purim is the only holiday about which different groups celebrate it on different dates. Pesach is the same date for everybody. Rosh Hashanah, same date for everybody. Shavuot, the same day from everybody. Everything else gets one day. Purim is the only one that has, by design, 2 days. I would almost say another interesting thing is Purim is the only holiday on which you don't say Hallel. But there are really 2 others that you don't say Hallel on. What are the other 2 holidays? Hanukkah you say Hallel, Pesach you say Hallel, Shavuot you say Hallel, Sukkot you say Hallel,
Yom Ha'atzmaut you say Hallel.
Yom Ha'atzmaut you say Hallel.
Patsy Hallel.
Wait, on which day?
On Yom Ha'atzmaut, you don't do full Hallel, do you?
You do a full Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut.
Oh,
Either you do Hallel or you don't do Hallel. Nobody does it. Some people do Hallel without a bracha. That's another.
Yeah.
That's not Chatzi Hallel. Chatzi Hallel is on Rosh Chodesh.
Okay.
You take out 2 paragraphs for Chatzi Hallel.
I see. So if you don't do a bracha, it's still a full Hallel.
Right.
Yeah.
So the only other days are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur don't have Hallel, but they may be for a different reason. It's too intense a day, too solemn a day. Tov. There's one other thing which I discovered about Purim. Every other holiday, you can really fulfill your obligation without another human being in the world. Minimally, right? You can do Seder by yourself. My mother will testify that my first Pesach was her by herself in the hospital with me. So that was her first Pesach. Rosh Hashanah you could do, but you could blow your own shofar. Yom Kippur you can do all by yourself in Antarctica. Sukkot you can do by yourself, build your own sukkah. Purim you cannot fulfill Purim on your own. Impossible to fulfill Purim on your own. We'll get to that a little bit more of that later, but one cannot fulfill all the obligations of Purim on one's own. And so I want to start with this idea that Purim is the hyper-local holiday. And it means that Purim is meant to be the celebration of the rescue of your community. It is a very, very community-focused holiday, and therefore you have this experience of people collecting matanot levyonim, gifts for the poor, different things like that, and making sure they give mishloach manot to different friends. So that's a very important thing. Okay, let's just look at some of the other facets of Purim. Number one is Purim has its story that is rooted in Megillat Esther. Megillat Esther, as we will explore in much greater detail in the next class, which is a Parsha Shavua, is becoming the Megillat Esther 3-part series. But the story of Purim takes place entirely outside of the land of Israel. It's one of a very few number of books of Tanakh that do so, and it is certainly and so this is a book that has a whole sort of diaspora element to it. And as people have noted, the Megillat Esther does not reference Hashem. I want to just show you one interesting thing. This is a traditional Ashkenazic Megillah. And even the picture of the crown that is on this, that is on each of these, itself has a certain tradition around it. Now, the Megillah you'll notice that the Megillah here begins with the word, each column begins with the same word. The crown is sort of inserted atop the lamed of the word Hamelech. So you'll see there, I'm going to let someone in. You'll see there it's Hamelech. And as we go through the Megillah, you will see every column has the word Hamelech. Okay? And if I'm not mistaken, the sort of a tradition that every time you see the word Hamelech in the Megillah, it is sort of a reference to Hashem. If it's Hamelech HaChashverosh, then it is it may be a reference to the earthly king. But many, you'll see that in this particular Megillah, many of the references of Hamelech do not have the word Achashverosh after them, as they have been written on the top of these columns. Now, you will not see illuminations of this sort in a Sefer Torah. Excuse me, while I roll this back up. A Sefer Torah has Hashem's name, and so therefore it has a certain measure of Kedusha. Megillat Esther does not have Hashem's name, and so the Sofer didn't have to go to the mikveh, and it has a less Kedusha, and you're allowed to therefore hold it with your hands. Right, you note that when we read a Sefer Torah, we have a yad to read because we're not allowed to touch the book, the Sefer Torah, with our hands. So this tradition of writing the Megillah in that fashion is a way of demonstrating that we sort of see Hashem in the background of the story of the Megillah. It's a play on the word Esther, which is Haster Astir, that I will surely hide my face. So God hides his face. This is a little bit what Aaron was referring to. I just think Aaron's version of it was a little more aggressive than I was willing to accept, or at least in terms of what tradition's willing to accept. Well, tradition accepts that it's not overtly in the Megillah, but we certainly see God behind the scenes in Purim. Okay, now. So the first of the mitzvot is reading the Megillah, and this is the reading of the Megillah is done both at the night and in the morning, Laila Vayom, and part of this is a sense. It's meant to bring back the sense of urgency that the Jewish people had in the first Purim. There was a sort of the sense that the entire Jewish people were going to be wiped out, and in order to preserve themselves, what did they have to do? They had to cry out to God, Laila Vayom, and
They had to fast.
So yes, they did.
For 3 days.
They did, which is interesting, because that's a whole different story. I want to just how should I put it? I want to just leave that aside for the moment. But referencing that same verse, and again, I'm leaving some of the literary interpretation for our next class, or for the next 3 weeks. We'll be looking at Megillat Esther. I'm leaving a lot of the textual interpretation out of this, but when Esther does ask for the other Jews to fast with her, she literally uses the words, right? She says 3 days, Laila Vayom, day and night. So the idea here is that there was a certain sense of urgency in the prayers, and so we were calling out day and night, and so we have to read the Megillah both day and night. In truth, actually, even before we read the Megillah, we are sort of invoking a little bit of the tension of that particular moment. The tension of that particular moment was that the day of fighting actually was not on the 14th of Adar, which is the day that we celebrate Purim. The day of fighting was on what day? Anybody want to say?
Sorry, what was the question? I had to step away.
What day did they engage in the street brawls with the anti-Semites?
Oh, I don't know.
Answer is the 13th of Nisan. The reason that is we call, what do we call the day before Purim?
Tanit Esther.
Tanit Esther, which is the fast of Esther, which is actually not the fast of Esther, because the fast of Esther took place on Pesach. So this is not the historical fast of Esther. This is we'll call it the fast of the Esther story, because it was a spiritual war against Amalek. The rabbis assumed that there was a fast that was going on that day, and so we sort of invoke the fast as a way of sort of embracing the struggle of the day of conflict, and then we get to Fres on the 14th. So again, this is we have a very ritualized kind of sense of going back and reliving these attitudes. There's a wonderful book which is called Jewish History and Jewish Memory by Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, and he talks about how Jews are not as interested in history as they are in memory. And memory is the sense that you create these experiences, these formative Jewish experiences, where you sort of live the events of the past. The most obvious of them is Pesach, right? Because a person is obligated in every generation to make himself seem as if he went out of Pesach. But as Yerushalmi says, for Jews, they get out of jail, in Parshat Miketz when Joseph is pulled out of jail, and they cross the sea on Parshat Beshalach when we read of the splitting of the sea. But also on Purim, we sort of relive the trauma and the celebration of the story of Haman and Mordechai and Shushan, etc. What is interesting is that, this is a total aside, but I think it's just very, very interesting. Various communities throughout the Jewish world had moments of real. They were between Skilla and Charybdis. They were bein bayam uvein bayabasha. They were in true peril, and they were rescued. There are a number of them. There's there's one in Frankfurt, for example. There's one of my favorite ones is the one that took place in Piedmont. The anti-Semites were chasing the Jews and they were accusing them, I think, of sympathizing with the French, and the Jews are running up the stairs to barricade themselves in the synagogue, and the anti-Semites are running behind them. And in between the anti-Semites and the Jews was fired the first cannonball of the Napoleonic army, and it lodged itself in the wall. And it was seen as a miracle because the anti-Semites ran away. And there was that little indentation in the wall. They used to have a sign that says Nes shel bomba, the miracle of the bomb. And they would have a Purim. They would have their own micro Purim. And it's even referenced in various religious texts that if your community happens to have one, but there was one in Grenada that went back 1,000 years from now, and there's the one in Frankfurt that I mentioned, and various places around the world had their Purim Katan because they sort of celebrated these moments. But back to our Purim. Our Purim is not just, we mark this day, but it is we sort of relive it. And so again, the fast is a reliving of it, and then you have the reading of the Megillah morning and night. I would also say that the dressing up we have to hopefully separately get a sense of what dressing up means. Before we get to that, let's go through just some of the laws of the Megillah. So the Megillah is interesting. The mitzvah is to hear the Megillah or to read the Megillah, but particularly to hear it, and it has to be heard from a kosher scroll. Now, as opposed to a Torah that needs every letter to be perfect, the Megillah needs to be 51% kosher. It has a much lower bar. But we still try to get the best Megillah we can, and you need to hear from someone who knows how to read the Megillah. Both men and women are obligated to hear the Megillah, and you're also obligated to hear every word, and you're obligated to hear every word in order. It does not work if you get the end of one Megillah reading and the beginning of the next Megillah reading. Why? Because you haven't heard it in order. You have to hear the Megillah in order. One of the interesting things okay, Annie, you have a question?
Yes, my usual questions. Can a woman read the Megillah for the whole Kehillah? And if not, why not? Oof,
Gee,
oof, oof.
giving me the softball questions tonight.
Better.
Okay, so it depends on who you ask. So, I
Um,
mean, practically, the answer is the woman can read the Megillah. She can read the Megillah for other women, and practically there are no practicing Orthodox synagogues. I shouldn't say that. I think they're very minimal. It's a considered a marginal activity for women to read for men. What is the reasoning behind this? Well, interestingly, the Mishnah says everyone is obligated in reading the Megillah, even women, even children, which means that women should be able to read for men. And the Rambam seems to echo this language as well. However, there was an early Gaonic work, or an earlier work, which is a Gaonic work, called the Bahag, the Baal Halachot Gedolot. And the Baal Halachot Gedolot seems to suggest that women have a different mitzvah. The women's mitzvah is to hear the Megillah, the men's mitzvah is to read the Megillah, and so they are fulfilled differently, and so therefore women cannot fulfill a man in the mitzvah of Megillah. And as such,
so when was this Gaon so-called?
the Bahag is not one person, it's more of a collection of various Gaonic edicts, but let's say somewhere between the 8th and the 10th century.
Yeah, when women was back then chattel, yeah. Okay.
Well, I'm not sure that we necessarily had to call them chattel, but I understand that women's place in the world was very different than
That's right.
when
That's right.
you can. It was before Golda Meir. Okay.
Yeah.
So fair enough.
And before Annie, yeah.
So, but there are many places in the world, including Shaare Tzedek. Although this year I think we are not having women's reading. There are many places in the world where women read the Megillah, and they read it for other women. And so
Yeah,
that
part I know. Yeah.
okay. So that's now I wanted to just show you one interesting aspect of reading the Megillah. Let me. Okay. If I'm going to share my screen and just show you one little bit. It's not going to feel quite as authentic as I want because it's not really a parchment Megillah, but you'll understand. So this particular, I'm going to put on the translation for just 1 minute. Okay. So this this chapter 3, the beginning of chapter 3.
Oh, that's when Mordechai discovers the plot of Haman, right?
Well, it's after the edict of Haman comes out, chapter 4, beginning of chapter 4.
Yeah.
Now, the beginning of chapter 4, it says, when Mordechai learned all that had happened, Mordechai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went through the city crying out loudly and bitterly until he came in front of the palace gate. For one could not enter the palace gate wearing sackcloth. So the way that you read this is not in the festive trup, the cantillations of Megillah, but you read this with the trup of Eicha, of the scroll of lamentation. So it sort of sounds like this. O Mordechai, yada kol asher nasa, vayikra Mordechai et begadav, vayilbash sak va'efer, vayetzei betoch ha'ir, vayizak, zak hagdola umara, vayavo ad livnei shar hamelech, ein lavo, and then it switches back to Megillah. And then it's going to go back in. There's about 10 words that go back to the Eicha, and then it goes back into the Megillah trup. So the reading of it again tries to give you that feeling of emotion by switching back and forth into the scroll of lamentations and the Megillah and the Megillah scroll. Also in chapter 6 begins with the king cannot sleep. And so it has a special tune. Bahalai lahu nadedashnat hamelech. It takes on Rosh Hashanah themes. right? Because it wants you to think about God the King, right? And so God is controlling things in the background. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a sense of what the reading of the Megillah and how that confers a bit of a sense of the experience to us as we read the Megillah. Now, of course, one of the central experiences of the Megillah is, some people love it, some people hate it, is, what am I talking about?
The mentioning of the 10 sons of Haman in one breath.
I was thinking about the grogger.
The grogger, yeah.
Making noise,
okay.
right?
Rashan.
You should just know, in very frum places, they don't like the grogger so much, because sometimes it makes it hard to hear the text. In Shara Tzedek, they like the grogger plenty. Right? And so the grogger has a whole life of its own. The idea of the grogger is, when you hear Haman's name, some people also throw in Zeresh, his wife, is you're going to you're essentially drowning out the name of Amalek. Okay, so that's another aspect of that. Okay, so now we've sort of covered the first mitzvah, which is reading the Megillah night and day. Then we have the next mitzvah. The next mitzvah is going to be the Purim Su'udah, the Purim meal. So you're commanded to have a meal, and it's supposed to be meat, and it's supposed to have bread, and it's supposed to also have wine. Now here comes one of the famous laws of Purim. Right? The Talmud says, Chayev inish lebipsumi b'voraya ad lo yada bin aror hamin levarach Mordechai. A person should get drunk on Purim until that person does not know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed be Haman. Right? So you have to be pretty inebriated to not remember who the villain and the hero of the story are. Right? So that's pretty darn drunk. So various rabbis have tried to sort of delimit this a little bit. The Rambam says it really means you should drink until you get sleepy, which for me doesn't take that much. But, and when you're sleeping, you don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. Very good. The Mishnah Berurah says you should drink, but don't get too drunk. You need to always remember to be appropriate. But there's a very interesting aspect to the way in which this edict is put together in the Talmud. The Talmud says, first it gives that statement, a person must drink on Purim until he doesn't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. And then it tells a story about two rabbis, Rava and Rabbi Zera. Rava invited Rabbi Zera to his Purim Suda, and they drank copiously. And then Rava thought that it was Yom Kippur, and it was Yom Kippurim, and he decided that he was going to slaughter his friend Rabbi Zera. And he, in fact, does slaughter his friend Rabbi Zera. But Rava is a very great rabbi and has, I guess, access to the Sefer HaYetzirah and various other mystical means, and he is able to resurrect Rabbi Zera. The next year, Rava says, Rabbi Zera, we had such a good time last year. Maybe you want to come to my Purim Suda. Rabbi Zera turns to him and says, nope, going to Aunt Millie's this year. Actually, it doesn't say anything about Aunt Millie. The Talmud actually says, Lo b'chol shata v'shata mitrachesh nisa. We cannot rely that every time you can rely on the miracle. See, he basically says, it's too dangerous to go to your Suda. I am not going to get slaughtered again. I am not going to get resurrected again. And so one of the rabbis of Provence, Rabbeinu Ephraim, says the story is actually a negation of the edict. The edict was you should get so drunk on Purim that you shouldn't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. Comes the story of Rabbah and Rabbi Zera to say, that is a bad idea. Let's not do that. And so that's how Rabbeinu Ephraim understands that piece of Talmud. Now, most other authorities understand that piece of Talmud to say you should get drunk on Purim. I happen to think Rabbeinu Ephraim is the best read of that Talmud. And I do not think people should get that drunk on Purim. However, I do think a little bit of alcohol is a good idea. Now, I think in the chat, I think the question was asked, why do they institute this? Why have drinking at all, right? So the answer to this question, I believe, is that wine has always been the WD-40 of social interaction, right? When you need to grease the wheels of social progress, a little wine is not a bad idea. My son gave me a book that basically claimed that there was no major treaty ever signed in Europe without wine. And this is you know that sometimes you're feeling a little bit shy, inhibited at a dinner party, and you have a cup of wine and you open it all up. So I think that is why they instituted this, because as I said to you, the Purim is the holiday of being hyper-local. It's the holiday of bonding. And so in order to bond, so they said, okay, we want you to have a little bit to drink. Maybe not too much, but certainly enough to open up. And so that, Debbie, is, I think, why that there is an instruction to drink on Purim. My recommendation is no more than 2 glasses. And certainly, if one is going to hurt you, don't drink that either. So that's my recommendation.
Well,
Carol's giving me looks. You don't like you think you think we should vote for a dry Purim, Shelley?
Well, yeah, I think there are other ways to get to a place. If we tried meditation, I mean, maybe one gets,
I think people need a little wine to start meditating.
Well, I don't know. But, the thing is, what you said, if it hurts you,
Shelley, I'll into that. I'll into that.
For somebody who has addiction.
Okay, look, I 100% agree. If somebody has an addiction, then this is not the mitzvah for them, right? So, and I, if you ask me, I think you can be a very good Jew without drinking on Purim. I can say that with full authority. Some in Rabbeinu Ephraim, we're all good. If you're talking about what the spirit of it is, then I think it is something you want to be a little bit more social than average.
Yeah, but all Jewish celebrations start with wine somehow, except maybe Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur, you drink wine before you get to shul.
Okay, so everything is started with wine. So why dafka to exclude Purim?
Because Purim seems to be not just a ritual cup, but an actual state of inebriation. The truth of the matter is, I think I drink more on Pesach than Purim, but that's a different next holiday. Okay.
I buy Rabbi Ephraim's assertion here.
And I think you're in good company. Okay, now moving to the question of some of the other mitzvot of Purim. So there are 2 other mitzvot of Purim which are very important. One is mishloach manot, sending gifts to another person. So you send a gift of 2 separate food items to another individual. And this, I think, helps us understand just one more layer of what Purim is really about. Purim is about community bonding. And that community bonding is something which we are expecting to happen on this Purim. And so one of the ways is, okay, we bring people to our meal, and maybe we have something to drink with them so we can enjoy their company. But then there's some people maybe I can fit 20 people on my dining room table, but I have friends across town. That's what Mishloach Manot Ish L'Re'ehu is for. That's why we send gifts of food. It's there used to be a phone call there used to be an advertisement for I think AT&T or maybe it was a Bell telephone. They used to sing, "Reach out and touch someone. Reach out and show you care." So I always thought that was the jingle for Mishloach Manot. Reach out and touch someone, right? Reach out and give someone a little heart. Why do you have to do it through a messenger? The idea through a messenger is that it's long distance, right? And that you're involving another person in it, and you're sort of showing an additional layer of networking in the whole picture. And the last of the mitzvot is matanot lavyonim, gifts to the poor. And gifts to the poor are meant to be, it has to be sort of meant to be about the value of a meal. So I would say probably about $20, $25 per person. So I should say $20 to $25 would be what it would cost for a person to eat minimally a nice meal. And so you're supposed to give that for 2 people. So I would say about $50 a person was your minimal donation for matanot le'evyonim. You can certainly give more. And Maimonides says something fascinating about this. He says that the that if you have now, we now have all four mitzvot on the table. We have Megillah, we have Purim Su'udah, we have Mishloach Manot, and we have Matanot Evyonim. So he says, which one should you spend the most on? He said you should spend more on Matanot Evyonim, gifts to the poor, than all the other ones. Why? He does not give the argument that the poor need your help. He does not give you the argument that poor are worth it. He says, and his language is very, very interesting. He says, Ki ein simcha gdola u'meforah. There is no joy which is greater and more splendid than lismach lev hanim, than to gladden the heart of the poor. So the idea here is that the poor and being able to give them joy is really your greatest simcha. It's your greatest experience of joy yourself. And this sort of comes of an interesting distinction between pleasure and happiness. So the Purim Su'udah, you get good steak, you can get pleasure. You get good wine, you might be able to get pleasure. Maybe you open up to other people, you make friends, maybe you have a little bit of happiness about that. But the idea of giving to the poor as the real access, the real source of joy, that is what the Rambam's saying, is that joy is really knowing that you are fulfilling the will of your Creator. You're doing things that are truly giving to others. That's where real joy comes from. And so again, yeah.
Is it supposed to be anonymous, the giving of the money?
I mean, that's a general rule of tzedakah.
Mm-hmm.
This might fall into that category. Incidentally, though, you are not meant to take this money from your maaser money. This is supposed to be separate from the money that you tithe off of your income. So, if you will, it is post-tithe tax income that goes to this particular mitzvah. But I want us to, I think it's very important to me that we look at this whole picture and say, okay, you know what? The way that they set up the mitzvot of Purim, they're about, once you get past the story of Purim, which is all the Megillah, the Purim feast, the gifts to the poor, and the Mishloach Manot, these gifts of food to other people, these are all about strengthening the sort of the sense of network and embrace of your community. And again, so in Israel, you have 2 days of Purim, depending on where you live. So if you live in Tel Aviv, you celebrate Purim on the 14th, Herzliya 14th. If you live in Jerusalem, that was a walled city from the days of Yoshua ben Nun, and you celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar, and not on the 14th. And you can't hire your Megillah reader from Jerusalem to come to Tel Aviv, and you can't hire your Megillah reader you can't hire a Jerusalem Megillah reader to come to Tel Aviv. You can't hire a Tel Aviv Megillah reader to come to Jerusalem, because they have different days of obligation, so they can't fulfill each other. And there are a lot of people who like to do double Purim, right? My daughter did this. Celebrate Purim on the 14th in Herzliya, and then go into Jerusalem and party all over again. So that's just a sort of feature of Israel. One interesting thing is there's a whole list of cities that celebrate 2 days of Purim because they're not sure whether or not they had a wall in the days of Joshua. Having a wall in the days of Joshua is the definition of a city that does the 15th of Nisan. That may seem very, very strange to you, but I'm not going to answer that question until I'm not sure we're going to get to it tonight. But that question I will answer in our Megillah series. It's a very, very interesting answer provided by Rabbi Yoel ben Nun. But back to this list of cities. So some of these cities include Tiberias, Hebron, Lod, where the airport is. Hold on. Akko is another one. Akko, Yafo, Beit Shan, and then Shechem, and even Gaza City.
And Jericho.
Nobody's reading Megillah in Gaza City anymore, but what's that?
What about Jericho that used to have a wall and
Jews are not supposed to live in Jericho.
Well, back when?
No. Once Joshua conquers Jericho, you're not supposed to live in Jericho.
There were no Jewish community ever after that in Jericho.
There's a place called Mitzpeh Yericho.
No, that's something else.
Right, but Jews do not live in Jericho.
Okay.
It's a holy site, right? God won that war for us. So
Again, you Joshua, but again, yeah.
okay, now let's get to okay, one last thing about Purim, right? So if you are Puriming, right? So this is the holiday of costumes. So why have a costume on Purim? What does that have to do with anything? No ideas out there?
Can't that substitute part of the drinking part where it's like you're not supposed to be able to tell who's who?
That's cute. That's cute. I haven't seen that.
I'd look at that.
Okay, somebody else said the same thing until you don't know the difference. Okay, maybe. So some people say it's a little bit like trick or treat, right? You guess who? Somebody totally that you didn't think. And one of the things that it says in the Megillah, it says v'nafhochu, that things were turned around. Asher yishlatu haYehudim hema besonehem, that the Jews dominated their oppressors, right? So the idea of this sort of turnaround is that this costume is meant to symbolize the turnaround of the Jewish people. Okay. The other way to sort of maybe slice the onion is that it goes to the whole idea that the miracles are hidden in Purim, right? And so we hide ourselves. This idea of Hester Panim, God's hidden face, on Purim, that's perhaps one of the sources for dressing up. Okay.